Hello, all. My name is Erica Starhunter, and today I will present on the social issues surrounding the education system in Mexico, specifically the fact that Indigenous peoples and their languages are not considered when creating educational materials. So, I will discuss how education could be made more accessible to the Indigenous peoples of Mexico through the use of mother tongue teaching. My discussion will follow this outline. I'll start off by explaining my positionality, next give a context for the issue, present the motion and explain the issue, and end with a possible solution. Start off with who am I? I am a wife, a mother, a daughter, a friend, a student, a teacher. I am spiritual. I am a school counselor, and above all, I'm an advocate for children. I am very passionate about each of my roles, and I try to give equal time to all of them. I love my time with my family, my wife and son, and also my parents. I also think of my friends as the family I choose and enjoy spending time with them. I am also a student that sometimes struggles to balance work time with kitty time. But honestly, besides my wife and my parents, my students and my role as teacher and school counselor have had the biggest impact on who I am as a person. I love working with children and finding ways to support them on their journey toward adulthood. I have spent my entire career at a school that has been the spot where international students have been placed. Prior to a newcomer school, my school, among others, were the places that ELL students first encountered the American education system. We have students from all over the globe that speak all different languages. I have always felt from the very beginning of my career that language is an extremely important aspect to a person's identity, and honoring that language is important. Expectation might be to enculturate our international students, but I believe that we need to learn from each other and find ways to honor who they are as students and the cultures they come from. Rather than lose that culture, we need to honor it instead. That brings me to my proposal for the United Nations. I'd like to start off with a question. How many indigenous languages are there in Mexico? I don't want to assume the knowledge of all those viewing this presentation, but my guess would be that the answer would probably include maybe Spanish. We might know about Nahuatl, but that might be it. In fact, there are 364 indigenous dialects amounting to 68 distinct languages spoken by around 7.36 million people. Unfortunately, the indigenous languages of Mexico are disappearing. There are many reasons why this is happening, but the one that I will focus on is that indigenous languages are not represented in the Mexican education system. I'd like to share a video of, it's helping to explain this situation.
In Bellas Artes Palace, the high temple of Mexican culture, poet Celerina Sanchez is reciting in her native tongue, Tuun Sabi. It's part of the celebrations for International Mother Tongue Day. Here it's an especially big deal. 7.5 million Mexicans speak one of the country's 68 indigenous languages. But not all is well. More than half of them are in danger.
If my language dies, I'll never know how to name things, how to see the world from my point of view. I wouldn't be able to do that.
The loss of native languages hasn't happened by accident here. Indigenous people have historically been discriminated against, even punished for speaking their languages in schools. Migration to cities or the US has also taken its toll. Rennie says he's now one of the only young people from his village in the Tricky region to still play the old songs.
Things have to change. We shouldn't be thinking that people are less for speaking an indigenous language. I want to tell the world that it's actually very valuable because it locks in all of our ancestral knowledge, music and medicine, the things that we've been losing.
Mexicans seem to be coming round to that point of view. Those taking the Nahuatl poems handed out by officials in the metro are keen to hang on to their roots.
It's important not to lose our traditions and languages because they're our inheritance. We've already almost lost them, but we should teach our children to value what we have.
That's spilled into Mexico's artistic life, but it hasn't necessarily got beyond that. There's increasingly acceptance and support for cultural events like this one, but linguistics experts and indigenous leaders say that it's in the day-to-day that things still need to change. For example, in hospitals, even in indigenous areas, there's often a lack of interpreters, so people can't tell doctors exactly what's wrong with them. The same in the judicial system, in which indigenous people have been sent down without really know what's going on in their trial. Those are the harder, less visible changes that the new government will have to also engage with if it wants the country to continue celebrating, not mourning, its mother tongues. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Mexico City.
In order to understand this issue, you will need some context. I've broken down the issue into 4 topics. First, indigenous peoples, colonization of Mexico, the education system in Mexico, and the COVID-19 pandemic. There is so much to this period of Mexican history that I can't begin to share it all in the time I have for this presentation. But the main point that I'd like to put across is that prior to the Spanish colonizers landing on the shores of Mexico, there was already over 9,500 years of culture and civilization that existed. These cultures included the Olmec, Maya, Aztec, but these were just the largest ethnic groups. Throughout this time period, certain groups became more powerful while others lost power. The Maya people had their seat of power in the Yucatan area, whereas the Aztec people had their seat of power in the Mexican Valley. Even as various groups took power, the subjected group still remained and continued to live in their traditional ways and spoke their mother languages. These political movements and territory grabs actually created such a diverse set of ethnic groups in the area that to this day, almost 364 of their languages still exist. This next period is a very dark period in Mexican history because it was during this time that the Spanish systematically subjugated the indigenous peoples of Mexico. There is an excellent book and documentary by Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs, and Steel that has, in my opinion, the best explanation of how this atrocity happened to such a rich and strong group of people as the Aztec. The legacy of this atrocity has continued into the present day, as demonstrated by the fact the primary language of Mexico is Spanish, and the dominant language in the education system is also Spanish. For the education system in Mexico, we really don't have a lot of information on the education system prior to Spanish colonization, except for what is known about the Aztec system. The Calmecac was the one of the schools for those interested in becoming priests, and the Telpuchcalli for those interested in joining the military. It seems that for both of these schools, men were the primary target. Following Spanish colonization, the focus was on enculturation of indigenous people. Catholic priests originally wanted a more formalized education for all, but by 1605, only Spanish upper class were educated. During the independence period, there was a strong desire to move away from religious education, and school was free and also compulsory. Indigenous people stayed away from the public education because there was a huge mistrust of the centralized government. However, during the revolutionary period, the government tried to persuade indigenous peoples into public education by offering more services connected to the schools, including also adult education. By the 1940s, there was a swing back to religious education in public schools. There was also a push to increase the Spanish literacy rates. Just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the literacy rate was at 94 points. And this takes us to education during the pandemic. Um, it really should go without saying, but I will say that um, during this period, all school systems were challenged when schools were forced to close due to the pandemic and social distancing. Mexico's solution to virtual education was a program called Aprende en Casa, or Learn at Home. This program consisted of televised educational programming tailored for each grade level from preschool to high school. There were many issues with this solution, including access to technology, parental support, scale, and language access. The Secretariat of Public Educación, or the Department of Education, attempted to meet each of these challenges. For the issue of language, the television programs were translated into 15 indigenous languages, and the programs were broadcast over the radio. Teachers in the villages where many indigenous peoples live found that they were not able to assist their students to understand the televised programs. As a result, many students dropped out of school. In the 2019-2020 school year, 740,000, students dropped out. And in the 2020-2021 school year, 5.2 million students dropped. These are staggering numbers. Teachers and families were surveyed during this time, and one of the biggest complaints given by both was that the material was not accessible for students and teachers who had no way of differentiating the material for their students. Therefore, my motion is that Indigenous students in Mexico are denied an equitable education because they are not allowed materials in their own language. So, what is the issue? For over 9,000 years, the indigenous people of Mexico had created a rich and strong culture and civilization. Number two, but for the last 500 years, they have been denied their basic human rights because of Spanish colonization. Number three, even after Mexico gained independence, indigenous peoples are still being subjected to Spanish hegemony. Number four, the education system has only supported the Spanish culture, including the language. Number five, when indigenous peoples were promised social welfare from the schools, they were met with a requirement to send their children to Spanish-dominated schools. When schools went virtual during the COVID-19 pandemic, indigenous languages were all but forgotten. Number seven, students dropped out of school so they could support their families. Number eight, the Mexican Department of Education made no sincere effort to re-engage indigenous students. Number nine, as a result, even more students dropped out of school the following year. Number 10, now the Mexican government will need to regain the trust of indigenous peoples if there is a hope to bring them back to school. If you would like, there's a wonderful TED Talk on this slide with a woman named Odilia Romero. She tells her story growing up and her experiences in education. And one of the points that she makes is that indigenous language is a human right. Students deserve to learn in their mother language. I propose the solution is that all educational materials, including teachers, need to be provided in the student's mother tongue. This would require the SEP to collaborate with indigenous peoples to create materials that are relevant to the students in the service. And they need to also align with their academic goals. The goal is to protect the indigenous people's culture and language. I've offered a three-step solution, but of course, these steps would require a multitude of additional steps. I think ultimately the key would be collaboration with Indigenous peoples on how to best educate Indigenous students in their mother languages. I would suggest actively recruiting teachers from within the villages and offer free teacher training to any who are interested. Then, maybe similar to the AmeriCorps, the newly trained teachers would need to return to their communities to teach the children. As this program grew, you would have more teachers that could collaborate with the SEP to meet the needs of Indigenous children. I would also like to share this video. I think it's a really excellent way that students in Mexico are trying to preserve the mother tongue languages and also to teach other students and to value the mother tongue languages.
Zapoteco significa vida, para mí significa raíz, significa sombra, significa luz, es este calor. Para mí el zapoteco es vida. Nalaya Antonio Sánchez Ruiz, no a la de Tigrúpula Huchirrap.
¿Quiénes son? ¿Quiénes son? Oh, es la banda Huchirrap. Oh, la Jiduari Papa, la Jiduari Papa, la de Tipa Ganda, la de Irani Napa, la Jiduari Papa, lo Tipa Ganda, Upa, Villa Juchitán, casi.
Nosotros estamos tratando de retomar la cultura zapoteca para que esta misma cultura siga viva y permanezca en más tiempo con nosotros.
Carreta Maceta Pascual, Nugitu Nese, Nubitua Neshandie.
Observa primero para saber quién es qué y quién soy yo, quién, me lo pregunto también.
La cultura del hip hop estaba satanizado de que era muy grotesco, demasiado burlesco, solamente era groserías, sexo, alcohol y todo eso. Mas sin embargo, nunca habían visto este tipo de rap.
Mi corazón palpita entre sueños que yo tengo, mi cultura les grita. Mi corazón palpita en un sueño saquita. Cultura juchiteca, me da miedo que ya no existas. Tu mujer de sur, ya no vistes tus trajes. Tus hijos ya no conocen tu cultura y tu lenguaje. El paso de los tiempos nos dejaron personajes. Los pasos se olvidaron y borraron.
A partir de 1 año y medio que empezamos a movernos más con frecuencias en eventos, en pedir espacios, en visitar escuelas, tuvimos un desarrollo en el que mucha gente empezó a ver que esta cultura, este género, el hip hop podía apoyar a la cultura zapoteco. Entonces el hip hop ha ayudado que muchos jóvenes abran las mentes, que hagan su expresión, abran la voz, que no se queden ahí, que empiecen a moverse y a hacer cosas diferentes.
El zapoteco ha ido perdiendo conforme a los años. En mi tiempo de prepa, a muchos chavos les daba pena o vergüenza hablar en zapoteco porque ellos pensaban que era lo más corriente o naco de uno como joven, ¿no? Ahorita me he dado cuenta, gracias a los chavos de Cuchirrap y otros artistas cuchitecos, ha ido aumentando, ya muchos chavos empiezan a involucrar el zapoteco en sus pláticas cotidianas.
Muy buenas tardes, tengan todos y todos. Le hacemos una pequeña invitación.
Cantaremos de juco de amor, debes entenderlo, San Martínez, concuerdo con el trovador de recuerdo. Cuchitán somos poeta, Pachonácar su libreta, somos prosas y estrofas de manera perfecta. La cabe más.
Pues cuando canto en zapoteco es un sentimiento, es una sensación que nos pone la piel chinita. Cuando tienes ese micrófono y empiezas a pronunciar esas palabras en tu lengua, es algo increíble, porque ves que la gente responde a eso, ves que la gente empieza a levantar las manos apoyándote, que dices que sigas con ese ritmo, y entonces empieza a latir tu corazón muy rápido, que a veces sientes que te vas a detener, pero esas mismas emociones te hacen seguir.
Yo soy un rapero, no soy un delincuente, yo soy un poeta que escribe lo que siente. Aquí hacemos rap un poco más consciente, aquí expresamos más rap para la mente. No me confunda, yo no soy un pandillero, no robo ni asalto, pero soy un callejero, porque en calles veo lo real y lo sincero, porque no hay censura cuando eres un rapero. Oh.
Y para todos ustedes por estar aquí escuchándome un buen rato, muchas gracias. Nosotros fuimos la banda Cuchirrap.
The band's songs are really popular on the local radio stations. Although their essence is truly regional, they have fans in the US, Switzerland, and Australia.
So this is my final slide. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And here's a list of some of the resources that I used. Thank you so much.